Good evening, everyone. I am Jeffrey Helgeson. I will be narrating you from the lower right-hand corner down here. Forgive the angle on my webcam. It's down by my keyboard and kind of shoots up at a funny angle, so I will try to look at you when possible, but much of it might be at the screen. Anyway, this will be our topic for week one, the news talk. I'm going to be referencing a few different things, including the TED Talk from David Griffin, as well as our text by Machen and Pulzer. That's actually where I'm going to pull the first quotation from here shortly. Of the first of the points that we are to reflect on, basically, how significant are the points made in the textbook about news photography. There was a particular quote which was relatively early on in chapter 1 which comes to mind. And it's this quote from, once again, Machen and Pulzer, and it says, "The news photograph to an extent has been rethought as a design feature to lift a page, to communicate ideas and attitudes about the identity of the newspaper or magazine using it, and of their readership." Javier Herrera, designer of the award-winning Swedish newspaper Dagens Nyheter, apologies for the pronunciation on that one, spoke to us about the innovative ways that high-quality, visually striking images were used throughout the paper's design. Such photographs were no longer about bearing witness as such, but were part of a communicative strategy that suggests a more creative and thoughtful way of looking at the world. This, then, is not so much about what photographs depict, but about the ideas and attitudes the style of the photograph can get across. This is important for the new generation of readers. Ron Reason, a designer of many leading newspapers around the world, spoke of the more creative use of photojournalism alongside stock images and infographics. He explained how they are used more to symbolize the ideas behind a story rather than to document a particular moment. Now, it's with that concept in mind that I come to the first batch of photographs here. This is a New York Times article about the Australian fires, which are somewhat recent still, but I just have had so much coronavirus stuff lately that I did not want to use coronavirus from the news, so I went to this because it was still fairly recent. So, this is by Damien Cave, and the photographs are Matthew Abbott. So this was called The End of Australia as We Know It. So obviously there is some element of showing what's happening, but also what is the ideas behind it and the story from like what the authors of our text were talking about in these images. And see, this is where, in this case, we're talking about the end of Australia as we know it. We're symbolizing death here. It's not just simply the fires, but also, the death that actually occurred in the aftermath, but also the death of Australia in itself in a symbolic way, as the fires have forever changed the country. And here's another one, obviously showing more fire stuff, but also is symbolic of how their lives are changing. You have these tourists taking refuge on the beach on New Year's Eve. So it's about the lifestyle and the symbolism just as much as it is about documenting the moment here. And I'm just going to scroll through the rest of these, but so that you can see both the symbolism of death and destruction and change that relates to the photographs itself, as well as just obviously the documentation of the events as they unfold. You can see some of the aftermath of the fire with the children, which I think, maybe I'm getting a little carried away, but I think, you see the kids and hope for the new growth and change that comes after the fire. Anyway, this was a powerful story, powerful images that accompany it. Now, continuing on in the next portion, the next item for reflection was from what I learned in the module what is the journalistic value of an image. And personally, I see the journalistic value of images being that they add so much to a story. In fact, many images are able to tell a story on their own. And although the first thing I talked about was how images can be used in a certain way, that photographs are able to convey the certain ideas behind the story more so than what's actually going on in the story. And while that's still happening here, I feel like there's still a great story within each of the photographs themselves. Now, we can certainly glean certain bits of information from each photograph just to see what is going on, what else is happening, what's going on in society, how are people living, how is this all affecting them. What I'm going through here is a series of photographs that have to do with Syria and ISIS. I was inspired to pull these up because of the next quote, which I'm going to read again from our text from Machen and Pulser. So we have here is talking about freelance war and conflict photographers Lewis Quayle and Michael Gray. We met two other photojournalists who have, among other things, covered war. This is courageous, tenacious photography, often mainly carried out by freelancers who are prepared to push harder and act independent of employers who are less inclined to put employees in danger. But these photographers have a keen sense of the market for their images and the need for images to also point to the identity of a title. So I was inspired by that quote about these two, just to go through some images of war, but I didn't want to go too far back because I pulled up some images from Vietnam, and I feel like it gets away from the point of what we're talking about a little bit. And while all photographs tell a story, these ones, being a little bit newer, tell even more of a story. Here we have, yes, it's war, but then we also have the children of war. What's going on makes you wonder what's going on with these kids and what the story these journalists are trying to tell as they go through these. I don't want to ruin them by talking too much, but I don't want to not talk either. It just makes me think of having a homemade slingshot. It reminds me of being a kid. And then thinking about what it's like to be a kid in these situations and the kind of lives that we all led growing up versus what these kids are probably going through being in war. This is the second such image here, but it's just powerful because not only do we have the imagery of, obviously there's been a major attack here to the point where they're blowing holes through the wall, but at the same time, here are these guys trying to enjoy a moment, to have some tea, to smoke a little hookah and relax in this situation that's clearly very intense. The light here going through the bullet holes. It's a beautiful photograph, but once again highlights the horror of the war. For the final portion of the reflection for the Week 1 news talk, I wasn't able to completely avoid the coronavirus, but in reviewing the TED Talk by David Griffin and taking some points from what he had to say, it did make me think of one thing specifically that he said, which is how a photographer or photojournalist is able to tell a broad story in a very focused way. And in this case, that made me think of, obviously we have the coronavirus going on, and there's a lot related to that, but so much of it is told in a broad way. But now here we have a focus on the city of Wuhan in China, which many of you probably know is where more or less the epicenter of where the COVID-19 virus came from. So this is sort of a story within a story about everything that's going on there. So there's another thing that Griffin says is, he creates basically a good photojournalist is creating a visual narrative that in some cases, like the way with what we're going through right now in the United States, the photo makes a powerful connection to the viewer. So in some of these instances, it might remind us of going to work still, doing our jobs amidst all the virus and the countermeasures that we're trying to enact to stop it. Whether you're driving on an empty road, or you know someone who's been affected, or you're out there just still trying to do your job and protect yourself. But once again, going back to the first point, it's from Griffin. It's a broad story of the coronavirus, but in a very focused way here, as the journalist here was going through and looking just at people here, specifically in Wuhan, dealing with everyday life. I also think it's interesting and maybe worth noting the amount of people that are wearing masks here compared to what we've heard from the news media regarding the effectiveness of masks and personal protective equipment. I don't know if it's cultural difference or if it actually makes a difference, but it is interesting. I have to confess I'd be more worried about the fish in this picture than I would about the actual viruses floating around. Hope that's not wrong of me to say. Anyway, it's been a pleasure getting to share this with you. I apologize if I stumbled through things and paused it a little bit here and there, but hopefully I found some good images and was able to effectively relate it to the text. Hope you all have a wonderful week and stay safe out there.